Mr. Speaker, the legislation under consideration by the House today is deceptively titled the Women's Health Protection Act of 2021. Abortion is not health care unless one construes the precious life of an unborn child to be analogous to a tumor to be excised or a disease to be vanquished. This bill is far outside the American mainstream and goes far beyond Roe versus Wade. This bill constitutes an existential threat to unborn children and to the value of life itself. For the first time ever by congressional statute, H.R. 3755 would legally authorize and enable the violent death of unborn baby girls and boys by dismemberment, decapitation, forced expulsion from the womb, deadly poisons, and other methods, at any time and for any reason until birth. A significant majority of Americans are deeply concerned about protecting the lives of unborn children. A 2021 Marist poll found that 65% of Americans want Roe versus Wade reinterpreted by either sending the issue back to the states or to stop legalized abortion. Of that 65% majority of Americans, 40% of Democrats would, quote, allow certain restrictions on abortions as determined by each state. If enacted, this bill will nullify nearly every modest pro-life restriction ever enacted by the states, including women's right to know laws in 35 states, parental involvement statutes in 37 states, pain-capable unborn child protection laws in 19 states, waiting periods in 26 states, and so much more. 70% of Americans, Mr. Speaker, according to the 2021 Marist poll, oppose abortion if the child will be born with Down syndrome. With over half of those who identify as pro-choice, 56%, oppose or strongly opposed to abortion due to the expectation a child will be born with Down syndrome. Americans seek to embrace and not erase those babies identified as having an extra chromosome. H.R. 3755, however, overturns state laws that protect children with Down syndrome. Regarding international law, the bill falsely states that, quote, core human rights treaties ratified by the United States protect access to abortion. That is absolutely untrue. In fact, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which the United States has ratified, is concerned about unborn children being killed. It states in Article 6 that, quote, every human being has the inherent right to life, and that, quote, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life, close quote. It goes on to declare that the sentence of death, in other words, capital punishment, shall not be carried out on pregnant women. Why? The ICCPR creates an exemption from execution for pregnant women, recognizing that their unborn children have an independent claim to legal protection, as do all unborn children. Many women have been seriously harmed by abortion. The Silent No More awareness campaign and many other initiatives throughout this country, and this never gets reported on by the press, never gets focused upon so that people are more aware of these helps that are out there, both within the church as well as in a non-sectarian point of view, to help women who are post-abortive and who are suffering so immensely. A few years ago, Linda Shrewsbury, an academic African-American with a degree from Harvard who had an abortion, said at an event right here on Capitol Hill, and I quote, "The lies that brought me to that day and its sorrowful aftermath are crystal clear in my mind. Falsehoods and deceptions that concealed the truth about abortion. Lies planted into my thinking by clever marketing, media campaigns, and endless repetition led to a tragic, irreversible decision, the death of my first child." She goes on to say, "I really didn't understand back then. At age 20, Linda goes on, I had no inkling of the mental and emotional darkness I was about to enter. I couldn't have grasped the immense psychological toll abortion would take for years and into the future. Unrelenting tears, guilt, shame, depression. After spending many years in denial, I did eventually find healing. When I understood and rejected distortions about fetal development, double speak about choice, rights, planned and wanted children, I understood the reality and victimhood of my aborted child. I understood the absence of moral basis for choosing to disentitle an innocent human being of life. When I embraced the truth set me free, and I finally gained an inner peace. Linda Shrewsbury goes on to say, it's past time to lance the national wound of abortion with truth. The high culture, thought leaders, media, celebrities that brought us abortion seemed vested beyond extraction. I dreamed of a volcano of abortion truth that would erupt one day from the grassroots, women and men and their relatives witnessing to their suppressed emotion, unspoken trauma, and lived pain. With abortion denial ended, we as a society could then reconnect with reality and with life. Mr. Speaker, the United States Supreme Court majority in 1973 in Roe v. Wade wrote, and I quote him in pertinent part, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when human life begins," close quote. Sidestepping that threshold question and giving no benefit of the doubt to the child, they went on to legalize and enable abortion on demand. For decades, right up to this very moment, abortion advocates have gone to extraordinary lengths to ignore, trivialize, and cover up the battered baby victim. But today, thanks to ultrasound, unborn babies are more visible than ever before. When a woman is carrying a child, the first baby pictures, those that often end up on the refrigerator in celebration, are of the ultrasound pictures, not of the newborns, they follow later, but of the ultrasound pictures of that little boy or that little girl or the twins. Today, science informs us that birth is an event, albeit a very important one, but an event in the life of a child. It's not the beginning of life. Modern science today also treats unborn children with disability or disease as a patient in need of diagnosis and treatment. And there's been an explosion in interventions that have saved children's lives and mitigated many, many problems that they may face. How the disability, for example, was not caught early. Unborn babies are society's youngest patients and deserve benign, life-affirming medical interventions. All unborn babies deserve our respect and our love, not death by abortion. I yield back.